and my name's Peter Van Valkenburg. I'm going to be moderating this panel, which is our regulatory perspectives panel. My background is that I'm the executive director of Coin Center, which is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., focused on public policy for crypto, trying to get it right with lawmakers and policymakers. I was formerly on the board of directors of the Zcash Foundation, stepped off that board so I could take on this ED role at Coin Center, which is my main gig. So we have a really great panel. Some of my favorite people who work at the intersection of cryptocurrency and public policy to hopefully have a rounded out discussion about where we think things are as far as the state of public policy and being able to build and use these technologies in the United States and internationally. And I'm really excited to ask them some questions and get their expertise and have a good talk. So I'm gonna go. I'll call folks' name because Zoom can be awkward as far as like left to right. We're not all sitting on a stage, sadly. I'd really like to see you all in person more often. But I'll go down the line. I'll call people's names, and they will give you a little bit of background on what they do and their connection to crypto and privacy tech. So I'll start with uh, immediately next to me on my screen, at least, is JW Verrett. Go ahead, JW.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the work you do at Coin Center. Really appreciate your fighting for our rights there. My name is JW Verrett. I serve on the board of the Zcash Foundation, and I teach corporate securities banking law at George Mason Law School and do some expert work in white-collar litigation, defending people from the DOJ, including folks in crypto.
And, DOJ is going to be a relevant factor in our discussions today. Next up is Paul Brigner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Brigner. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Alliances at Electric Coin Company. I've been with Electric Coin for about 3 years. Did take a brief step away for a minute there, but glad to be back for those of you who know that story. I always have, through that time, I've been on the board as well. Not the entire 3 years, but during that time I was away. I was still connected on the board of Bootstrap, the parent of Electric Coin Company.
And then Michelle Corver.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Corver. I'm the head of regulatory for the crypto fund over at Andreessen Horowitz. Many of you know it as A16Z, a VC fund out of Silicon Valley. For many years, and don't hold it against me, hopefully you'll find my input valuable. I spent a lot of my career at DOJ as a federal prosecutor. I'm working at the end of my prosecution points on money laundering and some crypto matters, and then working on crypto policy there, as well as at the Department of Treasury at FinCEN. I work now mostly helping developers to navigate all of the regulatory complexities we're going to talk about today. So I'm super excited for the conversation.
Michelle is being modest. If everyone at the DOJ was as smart on this tech as Michelle is, I think we'd have far less troubles. And finally, Kurt Upshall.
Hey everybody, good to be back at ZCon. I was missing you all in person, but great to be able to share this panel. So I'm Kurt Opsahl. I am the Associate General Counsel for Cybersecurity and Civil Liberties Policy at the Filecoin Foundation. I'm also part of the Financial Privacy Foundation, which with many of you are probably familiar. Part of also a Universal Privacy Association, and a bunch of other boards and advisory boards that I like to do. Prior to Filecoin Foundation, I was the general counsel at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and so I just came into the privacy space through that work, both on fighting for privacy and privacy enhancing technologies that make the privacy a realizable goal, including working on very important issues like code as speech to allow people to express themselves and their views on privacy in the world through creating code that will enable other people to have those privacy rights, because privacy rights are both normal and fundamental for the autonomy and existence of everybody.
Amen to that, Kurt. Kurt has also done years of yeoman's work, and the EFF has been, of course, one of the greatest champions on this issue, going all the way back to the days of the early internet. So we have 90 minutes. Kurt might drop off a little early, and I don't blame him. This is a long panel. He had a prior engagement. But because we have so much time, I want to make this conversational. And I also want to invite you, the audience, to go ahead and stick questions in the Zcon app, in the Hova chat. I've been told it's pronounced Hova. If those questions sort of fit into what we're discussing, and I think that they're a really valuable part of the ongoing conversation, I'll just interject as we go. So we're not going to necessarily wait till the end for questions. But yeah, so just to lead off the discussion, I think, it's one of those strange, very strange sea change moments in public policy. And obviously not just about crypto, about a lot of issues. And there are opportunities and there are risks with a new Congress and with a new administration. And we're seeing a lot of things happen very fast, sometimes alarmingly fast. So I wanted to lead off with a general question before we get to what's changing or where we're optimistic. Just right now, from your perspectives, where do you think we have the biggest threats in the US facing privacy developers and projects today? Who wants to take that? Who wants to take a first stab at it?
Okay, I'll go first, for God's sakes. So I don't think this is new. I think this has been consistent for the entire time that I've worked in this space. And I would say the persistent fear and focus by policymakers on the bad activity over all of the other great stuff and the importance of privacy. I think that's a kind of a big kind of theme that we've seen for many years that unfortunately still exists. I would say that the new threat that I did not see coming is the lack of clarity, but not related to the securities laws. That's hopefully going by the wayside shortly with some new legislation and more reasonable regulators. But the lack of clarity that we now have relating to criminal prosecutions and anti-money laundering regulations. And I know we're going to talk about that a lot today. So I would say from my perspective, I think that is probably the biggest new threat that we're going to be thinking about and we should be focusing on.
Well, as a add to that, yes, and I think over the many years, I don't know if this is a new threat, but just to highlight this, we've had a lot of tension between law enforcement, who sort of say as technologies develop that provide people with privacy, will claim to be going dark, was a term used by the DOJ, FBI, which is somewhat ironic and sort of as a golden age of surveillance with more ability to surveil people electronically than ever before and find out the minute details of their digital lives. And then you put a few encryption wrappers around that information to give people a semblance of the privacy they might have had just walking down the street in the ordinary life 30 years ago, and they'll claim to be going dark. And where this has come up sort of again and again over the last 25 or so years, maybe 30 years at this point, is fights over the availability of strong encryption that doesn't have a backdoor. And that fight continues to this day. And if the government can regulate and insert a backdoor into cryptography, it is essentially breaking the math, breaking the security. And that security is a lot of what we depend on to use technology and maintain our privacy.
I know some of the rhetoric we use sometimes is well, this technology is now out of the box. You can't put it back in the box. And that's, that it's not always the most persuasive argument because people want to put it back in the box. But the real box here, if there's a Pandora's box. It's the sudden availability of surveillable data in the form of online and electronic communications. It's hard to put that back in the box to actually start reclaiming some level of privacy over our personal information after just, once people started doing everything over the phone and over the wires, suddenly you didn't really have any opportunity for private conversations anymore. Yeah, and you're right that we shouldn't lose focus on that more fundamental issue in cryptography regulation rather than cryptocurrency regulation. Just the question of strong encryption is still totally on the table. Look at what's happening in the UK right now. I don't know if anybody actually wants to chat about the UK stuff. It might be interesting to our audience, and I don't have a real quick summary on it. We didn't prepare notes on that, so none of you are on the hook for this test if you don't.
Uh, it's disappointing that the United Kingdom went to put pressure onto Apple to reduce the strength of its uh, cryptography, and what Apple ended up doing was no longer offering the encrypted iCloud service in the UK, which is um, in a sense, a compromise. In that sense, is that they didn't want to say that it was encrypted when it had broken encryption, and chose rather to not offer it, so at least people knew what they were going to get in the UK. But the UK has been pushing on this kind of thing for a long time. GCHQ, so well, they may have cut their teeth a long time ago breaking encryption, and maybe they got tired of it and they want to have backdoors to make it easier. Um, but that has been tension, but just to sort of bring it around, it's not just about breaking encryption to have some private and interrupt those private conversations or listen to them, but also the concept of putting a backdoor in cryptography is dangerous when you're using that cryptography for other things. So, cryptocurrencies use techniques of cryptography also for verification, for signing things. Like there's a lot of additional features that you can use with that math technology. And if those can be backdoored so that a third party could get in and adjust what the results, that can break some of the fundamental assumptions of trustlessness, or what is depended upon for a lot of blockchain projects, that you can trust the code to operate as expected, if that code could potentially be ordered through a secret order to be backdoored.
Yeah, I think there's that foundational discussion, which we can talk more about. Uh, are the underlying tools and technologies secure? Are people allowed to build them and publish them as scientific research? Because strong encryption really is scientific research for figuring out new tools and techniques for human flourishing. And maybe there is a division between UK and US policy long term, because in the US we have certain First Amendment guarantees that protect that speech act of, inventing new things and sharing the fruits of your inventions with folks. And then there's this other question, and Michelle was getting at this when she suggested that one of the big threats, apart from just the sort of maybe too exclusive focus on the bad acts that people do with the technology, it's also this question of, when are you just publishing software, or when are you starting to move into a realm of activities that is a regulated activity, even if most of what you're doing is publishing software? When are you potentially on the hook for an unlicensed money transmission prosecution because you built software tools that others used to move money? Coin Center's director of communications, Niraj Agarwal, has a great tweet that I think he's had pinned to his account forever. That's something like, "I'm sorry that your warrantless surveillance regime was predicated on the assumption that there'd always be trusted intermediaries." And so there's a question of, how strong is the peer-to-peer tech, as far as, like, can it be forced to be broken or made broken? And then how much can we do peer-to-peer versus through an intermediary? Because the more we do through peer-to-peer tech and the less through intermediaries, the less traditional avenues we have for things like data collection and surveillance, warrantless or potentially even with warrants. I want to bring in Paul and JW. Both of you have probably more experience than the rest of us on the panel, who are more sort of um, egghead policy people now, at working with companies and facing actual, like, requests for information, or having to interface with policymakers about the specific project that you're working on. Where have you seen threats over the last few years? Have the nature of those threats changed? Are you optimistic? Are you feeling confident? maybe I'll put Paul on the spot first.
Yeah, I have some ideas about threats, maybe from a little bit different angle, and certainly I do agree with the concerns over the criminal prosecutions. But to be honest, what I am most concerned about at this time is the credibility of the industry at large, and being able to demonstrate that we're all actually building things that are trying to transform and the financial system and provide for people to have more control over their assets and more privacy, instead of pumping and dumping the latest coin. And unfortunately, I am afraid that we're just going to see more of the latter, at least in the near term. So for those who want to play that game, get your stable coins ready and get ready to pull the trigger, because I suspect it's going to happen any moment now again, where we're going to have another pump and dump, where it could even come from the highest levels, which is kind of scary. So my concern is just about demonstrating that we're here to build things that are really good for the world and that are delivering on that mission. One thing that was said earlier about the Apple in the UK, ironically, that's a thing that I feel very optimistic about. I was glad to see Apple do what they did, even though can be viewed as a compromise. But what really encouraged me is that in the U.S. government, you had the Director of National Intelligence come out and say that the UK had actually tried to put in a backdoor, just calling it out for what it was, and the risks to national security because of that. So I think that was maybe the first time something like that happened at that high of a level, and I think even the administration chimed in support of that. So I know we're not talking about all the reasons to be optimistic. There are a lot of them, but to me, that was one of the biggest so far this year, at least in support of encryption and privacy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And your first point, definitely taken, about sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot or we need to get our house in order. I mean, crypto is just a big permissionless movement, so people can build what they want to build. And unfortunately, some of the things that gain traction aren't the most savory aspects of what our capabilities can actually make possible. I think in addition to sort of the silliness of some of the more casino-like projects in the space, we also should be mindful of where we've failed to live up to our own principles of robust security. I think the um the Bybit hack, sorry, I don't know why I have trouble with that one, the name, too many B's. The Bybit hack is just another horrible situation where there's large amounts of money now falling into the hands of North Korea because of poor security. And that doesn't mean that software developers should be regulated like financial institutions. And that choice, if that was one of the choices that's part of the blowback from this, would not even solve that problem. But it certainly makes it difficult to have really careful discussions about national security when you've got such bad facts on the ground as far as the wrong people getting the benefits of these new networks and new assets. JW?
I've gone from, I think I was at apocalyptic for a few years and just figuring I'm just going to ride this movement to zero and just go down with the ship, to just pessimistic. I remain pessimistic. Um, I do believe that all the personnel selections in the Trump administration are great for crypto. And over the next 4 years, they're not going to engage in this bad faith effort to destroy us. I believe they want to do the right thing. I mean, it's a great news that the Treasury Department has an announcement about the Beneficial Ownership Act, the Corporate Transparency Act, that they are going to rip the cords out of the inside of that machine, and just have redo it so only foreign actors have to comply. That's terrific. And let's remember, the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was the champion of that legislation. And I think it was implemented by Treasury in a bad faith way, well beyond what he had intended. But it says something that this administration said, no, we're just gonna cut it. That's great. Under Brian Quinten's, I think CFTC is going to aim to do the right thing as best it can. Same with SEC. We'll see if SEC and CFTC go as far as I would like. I mean, I would like something like, when a broker deals in crypto for a client, I think they should be encouraged to teach their clients about Zcash and about Tornado Cash and use them to protect their client's privacy. I would go that far, but we'll see how far we can go, but it's going in the right direction. I think that under the Trump administration, the president's been the target of lawfare for years, and that theme comes down through to the line level prosecutors, which is great. But the fact remains, SDNY's position, and this is a position that I think probably would have won the day, at least in district court. Their position in Tornado Cash effectively is the same thing as saying that they believe they have the discretion to charge everyone in DeFi with unlicensed money transmission and conspiracy to commit unlicensed money transmission. That means they believe they have the authority to put anyone in DeFi in jail for 10 years. I don't think that's an exaggeration at all of their exaggerated reading of the Tornado Cash filing. The only way to change that is either precedent, and hopefully we're not going to prosecute them anymore, so we won't get any legal precedent. Hopefully those are just going to get dropped, or statutory reform. And so I'm not going to feel optimistic at all until we have criminal statutory reform to money transmitter law and to money laundering law. I've been involved in cases where I've watched, just anything. A kernel gets you to conspiracy and gets you to conviction. And money laundering charges just get added like candy on the back end of anything that involves crypto. What they did to Nate Chastain, for example, was just a horrendous abuse of power. That guy wasn't laundering money. Extra hops on chain aren't money laundering on a surveillable chain that's easily surveilled by a chain analysis and a report. How is that money laundering? I don't know. It's just without statutory reform, we will never be free of that risk of abusive discretion. So I'm not able to get optimistic. What we can do is we can minimize our risk as developers and as communities. Be careful about how we communicate things. Don't have that hot tweet that's snarky and it isn't even really true, but jokes about criminality. Don't have that in the community at all. That will help with risk reduction, but the risk is there and the ability to abuse discretion is there. And so I remain pessimist.
Oh, that's really helpful, JW. I'm glad you brought up some of those specific cases too. I think for the audience that may not be steeped in all of the ongoing legal battles, probably the broadest theory of what is money transmission and who in these communities is potentially liable for conspiracy to do unlicensed money transmission are exemplified by US v. Storm, which is where the prosecution is going after one of the developers of Tornado Cash, two of the developers actually, and US v. Rodriguez, where the DOJ is going after the developers of the Samurai wallet, a Bitcoin wallet that used confidential transactions in order to increase privacy there. And these are, I would be sort of foolishly optimistic or foolishly bullish about the legal arguments to say that these are easy cases and that the DOJ is totally off base here. These are hard cases, I think, because, in both the Tornado Cash case and the Samurai wallet case, these developers, they didn't just publish a GitHub repository. They published software on chain in the Tornado Cash case. They maintained front-end websites that gave people easier access to the software tools that they invented. And in the Wasabi wallet case, they may have maintained a coordinating server for matching people who want to make private transactions. And the legal reasoning here that's really hard to work through boils down to, at what point do you stop just providing tools or a general purpose, and at what point do you develop some sort of specific knowledge as to what people are going to do with those tools, which makes you potentially culpable for the things that people do with those tools? I still think in both prosecutions, the government is off base and that those folks deserve, at the very least, the benefit of the rule of lenity, because, the relevant regulator, FinCEN, had said quite clearly that you're not doing money transmission if you don't have independent control over customer funds. So charging them with unlicensed money transmission or unregistered money transmission, to me, there's a problem with the fundamental rule of law. But I'm seeing JW's unmuted himself. You want to come back in on this?
Well, yeah, those are all the core issues, and then there's an additional set of tangential issues that just multiply by exponential factor prosecutorial discretion. So, for example, one of the cases I was a part of, U.S. versus Sterling, which was another abuse of power. I watched the prosecution tell the jury, if this kid bought the website, the clear domain website in 2011 that was used to point people to Bitcoin fog on the dark web, if all he did was buy the website domain and then stepped away, but never actually formally like emailed the people who were running Bitcoin fog and said, I withdraw from the conspiracy, we got him on conspiracy. We can toll the statute of limitations for 15 years to get him. And that's how they got him. And he's going to do 12 years for that. And all they really had to prove was that maybe he bought the website 13 years ago that was later used to point people to the dark web. Amazing.
Yeah, criminal liability is not a scalpel; it's a blunt instrument. JW, you got this going, and I'm thankful for that. Sort of identifying where you see there being some changes from the Biden administration to the Trump administration now. We can also talk about from the last Congress to the new Congress. I want to open this up to whoever wants to take it, but what else do you think, besides some of the things that JW mentioned, what else has gotten better? Ostensibly, this administration's more pro-crypto. At least that's what there's a lot of news and reporting and statements about. Where do you think that they've not shown improvement, or maybe even put us in a potentially worse situation, if you think there are areas there?
I think somebody has to call out the strategic Bitcoin reserve, because that's been the big news as of late. And I actually wasn't so concerned about a Bitcoin reserve, but some of what we saw over this last weekend disturbed me quite a bit. And so, things like that, I think demonstrate that there may be a lack of understanding of our space that's a lot deeper than I realized. And so, things like that make me pause and say, are we really on the right track? And we have a big meeting coming up on Friday where the White House is pulling together some very high-profile people in the industry. So, I'm hopeful, but we don't know who's going to be there yet. There's no list of who's going to attend. Someone pointed out that, it wasn't focused on people that are building the tech necessarily. So, I really think that I'm at a wait and see point to see, how does this go with the administration? I do agree that with JW, I think the appointments and everything that's happening at the agency level is truly outstanding. That's why I'm overall optimistic. So perhaps it's just that I need to develop a better way of dealing with the noise and ignore some things that are happening in the industry too.
I think there's a certain natural ickiness of what happens on crypto Twitter in response to any rumor about a strategic reserve, right? Because a lot of people have allegiances to different coins and different projects, and it starts to look a lot like rent seeking. Like, oh, can I get my thing bought as part of the U.S. Treasury? And I agree. I think that brings out a lot of the worst things in our community, and certainly we wouldn't want to lose focus on the important issues of things like criminal liability for software developers, because we're having these fights over what goes in the SBR, if you will. Michelle, were you were you about to say something about?
No, what I can say is that having spent a good part of my career, the bulk of my career in the government, the one thing that I worry about, and I hope will not happen, is that we get sucked into the vortex of high-level people in meetings and book reports, as I like to call them, studies. I find that those tend to waste time and effort from focusing on action. I think that there are opportunities for statutory reform across a lot of the various legal issues that we are facing in the blockchain space. And so, and also there are many career folks with expertise within the government that are still there, maybe, um, and who think that this technology is awesome, that don't abuse their authorities, that have been kind of the quiet champions. And we may talk about this a little later because there are so many benefits to privacy technology for accomplishing the goals that policymakers and law enforcement have as well. Um, and so I just hope that the voices of the developers and private sector, the voices of the career experts who actually believe in the technology, will not be drowned out by, by all of the people in charge, and that they will not get sucked into having meetings and fighting amongst the agencies as to who gets jurisdiction, and we can actually like have a concrete plan to move forward while we have the chance to do it.
Yeah. I know for my part, just to echo what both you and JW have said, and Paul as well, the work at the agencies has been encouraging. I think most notably, what's going on at the SEC is basically day and night. You went from multiple very aggressive civil action prosecutions, or actions rather, against seemingly, some of the better actors in the space with regards to an attempt to fit into and reasonably comply with relevant investor protection rules. So a really aggressive posture to Hester Peirce, who is one of my favorite people. Doesn't hurt that she's a commissioner at the SEC, but I would hang out with her no matter what. To her asking for, I think it was 48 or 49 incredibly sensitive and nuanced questions about how the technology works, just as a perfunctory matter before they decide exactly how they can offer the best clear guidance on this. To me, it's a very different approach than an SEC that just wants to assume that the technology hasn't changed and that all the same rules should apply to these people, even though they're doing very different things. Where I think I agree with the group that it's a lot less clear is on questions of things like the unlicensed money transmission prosecutions and the illicit finance issues. I think the appointments at Treasury look really promising. They seem very serious and committed to taking a reasonable approach. But, unlicensed money transmission prosecutions at the DOJ are ongoing. It would be fairly unprecedented for a new administration to drop those prosecutions, although it's kind of exactly what seems to be happening with Eric Adams in the Southern District of New York. So it seems like they're willing to do that in certain cases. And I think it would just also be great to get greater clarity from some of the agencies and groups that have in the past been like full of staff that's wanted to do good work and just wanted to go after the real bad guys and not waste time on a wild goose chase going after software developers. FinCEN's 2019 guidance remains to me one of the best documents in the space as far as trying to set out clear expectations as to who's going to be obligated and who's actually just doing software development. But in many ways, that guidance is in conflict with the DOJ's position on unlicensed money transmission. So maybe there's an opportunity for clarity there. I know I'm talking a lot as a moderator. I have a bad habit of doing this. I will put in a brief plug. JW, you were saying that we need statutory clarity. We need to amend 18 U.S.C. 1960. I would love to see that. I do think there is still an opportunity to work in the courts, though, and Coin Center is supporting a young man in Texas, Michael Llewellyn, who's a brilliant security expert on smart contracts, and it wants to release a protocol for private crowdfunding, but wants to sue the DOJ to get clarity as to whether he needs to register as a money transmitter before he publishes that protocol. So I think, the Southern District of New York might be quite hostile right now. They're fairly, friendly to prosecutors, especially in financial crimes cases. It's nice that we can bring some balance and bring an action for declarative judgment in Fort Worth, Texas, where Michael's lived his whole life. So I'm hopeful for that as well.
This might be a good moment for me to plug the PGP for crypto meetings that we've had recently, where Peter, you attended, and we had Michael Llewellyn there speaking. If anyone wants more detail on that, that's probably a great resource for you to go to YouTube, the PGP for crypto channel, and watch that. That was a month ago, but just recently we had another PGP meeting out there. So good work is continuing with bringing the community together through that initiative. Thanks for doing that, Peter, by the way.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for having me.
What,
Yes,
what, As
add
usual,
on.
what you're doing
Go ahead.
there, Peter, Coin Center is doing is way more important than the top 30 news items in crypto or the strategic reserve or even in the bills or anything. That's the most important level right there. And statutory reform if we can get it to the criminal money laundering and
Yes, I do want to add on onto that conversation. I do very much agree that getting statutory reform or going through the courts, and the reason why is that as JW is pointing out, we have issues of prosecutorial discretion, and in a from a prosecutor, they generally think that they always make good decisions, and so giving them discretion will get the most justice because they'll only use it when it's appropriate. Nevertheless, it is a bad like civic hygiene for a society to have it where everybody is a potential criminal, and then a prosecutor decides which one of these people you could go after, and there are many potential crimes out there. So you could have a situation in which there is a change in the guard, and there's a new set of officials who would be applying that discretion, and maybe they'll apply it more to your liking. That is not durable reform. Those that they can be changed again and come to a different situation. To get a durable protections for privacy, you need to have something which is a little bit more solid. So statutory reform, to actually put it in the laws that these regulators are charged with obeying, uh, that gives much more of a permanence. And then, at least in the U.S. Constitutional system, if you're doing it based on constitutional principles, such as like the code is speech, free expression arguments, or Fourth Amendment requirements, and really, like, we could get rid of the third party doctrine, right? That would change something at a very high level, so that even a statute, if Congress, went into in a wrong direction, then the Constitution provides a barricade for that. And elsewhere in the world, I don't want to focus solely on the U.S. There are also regulations and laws hitting these things, but in those countries, at least, there are still often international human rights treaties which talk about expression and privacy and some of these core rights that should, in my view at least, provide an opportunity to push those countries to respect these fundamental rights, and not have statutes that interfere with them. But that's it. To get a durable reform, it's more than just having the regulators who are or prosecutors who are using their power wisely, but to get it so that that power is cabined in a appropriate way.
Yeah. And it gives us a unique opportunity to be in favor of the rule of law rather than what people think we are, which is in favor of like anarchy or something. Like the rule of law should bind prosecutors. That's really important, that we're a government of men and women and not laws. No, the other way around. Michelle.
Peter, I wanted to close that loop because, one of the things that I have, conversations that I've had with a lot of developers is about the excitement with this new administration and the new people in charge, et cetera. But I've said, this is the long game, people. And this is why we do need statutory reform, that we potentially need codification of, guidances and binding on judges. As we've seen in some of these cases, it is swept aside completely in some cases by prosecutors charging criminal violations of those regulations. And so I think for the long term, and those of us that are longer in tooth can say this, 4 years is a very short period of time. And we don't know what will happen down the road. And so really focusing on getting protections in the law for this is really important. And in the meantime, until we have those protections, knowing that you always are going to have egos and people who want press releases, and to think that they're going to improve their careers by bringing some big case. To me, sadly, it's kind of the vanity, the evil and the vanity of the human race that is in every profession that can do, unfortunately, some damage when you're given power, such as a prosecutor is given. Thankfully, I think most people don't abuse that, but it only takes one when somebody's liberty is at stake. So
Couldn't agree more. I want to bring in some questions from the audience. This is first and foremost a a developer conference, and we've spent a lot of time with a little bit of inside baseball about the courts and Congress and a little bit on the international side as well. But there's some good questions here that sort of focus the debate on like what should people be building and how should people talk about what they're building. And Michelle, you had mentioned, I think in your first remark on this call about how, the longer discussion is not just about statutory clarity, but also about how can these tools actually improve our financial system in a way that regulators will actually understand, and how can we explain to them that what we're building is something that they're going to want in the long run, both for good consumer and investor protection, and even for